Welcome on board, Ryan.
Hey, appreciate
Thanks
you
for
having me
joining
today.
us. So, Ryan, let's get started with a small baseball card kind of intro, and then we will dive into the topic.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, again, appreciate you having me on today. I've been in the security operations space for about 15 years now. Was the Air Force first, and then on the private side now, built a few MSSPs. I've helped a lot of MDRs go to market in my time as a Gartner analyst, and my role right now as director of security operations services at Stratascale is really helping customers go find the right products and services, whether I deliver it or through partners, to help them adopt some of these things we're going to talk about today in the hype cycle, things that they might need as gaps, all towards moving towards a modernized SOC.
Wonderful. Thanks, Ryan. So today, our kind of key focus for the discussion is going to be the recently released report by Gartner on the hype cycle report for security operations. So interestingly, amongst all the reports which kind of comes out from any of the analysts, this is one which I kind of look forward to because of a few specific reasons. One is like I think inside me there is a kind of futurist. I love kind of looking into the future, and also I love kind of building things for the future. So that's something about me. So this is the report which is very exciting because it kind of gives me a good peek into the future and the trends and how things are moving in the industry. And I remember when I started my first company, I got to know from one of my mentors about this book called Crossing the Chasm, which is considered as one of the classic. And this hype cycle, I mean, I find some kind of similarity, but it's also very different. And these two are very interesting from two different perspectives. One is from the builder's perspective of when you are building a product, how does it kind of go through in the life cycle, crossing the chasm. That's one. And then the hype cycle gives you a good view of where we are in terms of the landscape. So Ryan, since you had been at Gartner and for a long time, etc., it'll be great to know your perspective of the hype cycle. So let's kind of hear about what is the hype cycle about and how to use it. What are the benefits? And let's deconstruct hype cycle a little bit. And once we deconstruct, then we are going to go deeper into it, find out what's new this year, what went away from previous years hype cycle, and do a deeper dive. So let's start with your view on the hype cycle. Let's deconstruct hype cycle. What's it all about and how to use it?
Yeah, no, it's a great way for, and I like the hype cycle as well. It's a great snapshot into the like both products and services that customers are starting to use, like this one specifically for security operations, that are either being adopted now or going to be adopted. Like we're kind of looking to the future. But I think what's great, especially from someone who's I've done a lot of actually deploying these and helping customers integrate these, is it helps us on that side to be able to look at like, let's take SIM for example. Like a lot of customers have been doing this for years, integrating and buying SIM and trying to make use of it. And when you look at it where it is on the cycle now, where it's been around for let's call it like 15, 20 years now, and it's just now at kind of that slope of enlightenment. It helps you as a consumer be like, wow, this really is hard to do right. Right? I probably do need help to implement this because it's been around for a long time, and people are still at the point now where they're not fully at a point where it's fully productive for them. They're still finding new ways to do it. So when I look at each one of these pieces on the cycle, when I'm trying to implement these or looking for ideas of what's the next thing I need to do within my security operations team, right, to get better visibility, to detect things faster, to be able to respond, like these are probably the things that I want to look at, and it helps me understand how hard is this going to be, right? If I know I need threat intelligence, well, a lot of people right now it's in the trough, right? People have a hard time making use of threat intelligence services or feeds. So it's going to help me understand going into it that, what are the gotchas that I'm going to do when I buy a service or a new TI feed, and the things I should be focused on to make sure I can get some value out of it. Or maybe it's not the right time to go through that one because people aren't seeing the value in it yet. So I think that it helps us look at that in a holistic view so we can kind of attack what's the best next step for me as a customer or a consumer, to pick which projects go forward in the next year.
Yeah, yeah. So interestingly, I mean, the way Gartner did this, and I love that. I mean, there are like I guess four stages, right? Or phases, whatever you might call. The first is the innovation trigger, where something new comes up and people kind of see there's a new star, which got born, kind of stuff. There's a lot of limelight, a lot of enthusiasm, and then there's a lot of height of expectations, right? So that's the peak of inflected expectation, which is the second phase. And then I guess the expectation sometimes is slightly more than it deserves, and then there is a little bit of disillusionment, because when you try to implement it, you see, well, here's something is not working, things might not be mature, it might not be perfect for your use case, etc. So there's a disillusionment phase, which is the third phase. And finally, the enlightenment phase, where people become more pragmatic and understand what works well, what doesn't, and finally you hit the plateau, right? So kind of five phases, and not four. So these are the five phases through which any technology kind of goes through in its life cycle. And sometimes what happens is some of these technologies could just disappear in between in one of those. It's not necessary everything has to go eventually to the plateau or the enlightenment phase. So there could be few technologies which could become part of something else. Generally, it doesn't disappear completely. It gets morphed into something else. It gets merged into something else. So that's the reason why the hype cycle also changes every year. So, these are the kind of five phases, and to me, the most exciting phase is the first one, the innovation trigger, more because I love building new things. I mean, that's more of a personal kind of liking. um, so um, so from this perspective, this year we have seen a few new entrants, and also we have seen a few of the technologies um, which are no longer there, which was there last year, but this year we are not seeing it. So Ryan, let's get started with first, which are some of those which kind of vanished from hype cycle since last year, and then we'll get into which are the new entrants, and I think the new and emerging ones are going to be exciting to dive deeper. So Ryan, quickly, do you want to touch upon the ones which vanished from the previous?
Yeah, I think the most notable one that went away was the endpoint protection. And obviously, endpoint detection and response is still in there, and it's in the slope of enlightenment. But endpoint protection has been around forever, and again, we're all still using it. There's still Syndra-based, anti-malware, antivirus that's out there. But as far as an expectation or going forward, it's really those capabilities have been wrapped into the EDR product, so it's not a standalone service anymore. Same with like network sandboxing, like being able to to get value out of looking at an event in a sandbox and doing something with that is now being just integrated into existing tool sets, right? That are listed there in the hype cycle. So I think a lot of these things we'll see this trend, and we'll talk about this going forward. Is some of these things in the innovation triggers, or even the ones that have been around, there's eventually going to be a consolidation, right, of tool sets, and it's really because as the dynamics change with our environments, there has to be, right? So even like take for example, like CASB was developed, right, because we were moving and shifting towards the cloud, and there wasn't a firewall, right, for the cloud. So that as that's becoming to the point of where we're able to really use it now, the kind of next step I look at is, well, where does that integrate into firewalls, and where do you make that into where you have more of a single dashboard? Because we're all looking for better ways to get to a point where I can manage something from a singular platform, which is very hard to do. But that's like kind of the next steps in the integration there. So yeah, I mean, I think the things we've seen have more just been integrated into the tool sets that are there now, as opposed to being things that people aren't doing anymore. So I find that to be interesting.
Yeah. So Ryan, you mentioned about endpoint protection platforms which vanished and is now part of EDR. So it did not go away, but it got morphed. And also network sandboxing went away. It's now part of the secure web gateway and stuff like that. It got kind of inserted into that. And IoT security also came out, which was there last year, and this year, this time it's not there. So these are the kind of three major changes which we noticed compared to last year. And a few other things which I kind of, when I was going through the report, few other things which I noticed was that Gartner came up with this idea of cybersecurity mesh architecture. So I mean, that's a new term out there,
I haven't
but
heard
the
that one yet.
concept. Yeah, so conceptually, it's something which I guess all of you guys um, would be familiar with, or at least you will relate to very well. So there's just too many things out there in form of a mesh which doesn't really talk to each other, and there's a need for a kind of integration, a plane which kind of combines everything, makes things talk to each other, and have that, probably that holy grail, right, in
Right.
cybersecurity, that consolidation which we are looking for, which is not happening. So that's one of the things which I noticed. So so let's get into what's new. I mean, what are the new things, which are the new entrants this year, which wasn't there last year? Ryan, you can get started. I'll pitch in.
Yeah, so I mean, I think we'll start off with the external attack surface management. I think that, is one I've been looking at for a while now, and I'm glad to see that it started the innovation trigger. It's interesting because I think a lot of the attack surface management, what I mean, in previous MSSPs that I ran, a lot of times I would just look at, network traffic from the firewall and go over with the customer, here's places where we're seeing traffic coming in from outside your boundaries. Should we just disallow this, right? Doing like geo blocking and stuff like that on the firewall. And that was easier to do when your network was consolidated and confined to what your ranges were, where your data center sat. But now with the cloud, right, and we have almost everyone's on a hybrid approach between their internal network and what they're using for public private cloud. Now the attack surface is just ballooned, right? Data is just much easier to use and consume and put different places, and you just can't keep track of it. So I think it's a necessity that has come out of it, something that we used to do with just the firewall, but now we have to look at it more holistically as far as where are you exposed, right? And getting a snapshot of what that looks like from the outside in, right? Because I think when we're looking at a risk-based approach for how we address protecting your network, it really should start at what are people able to see, right? Like it's like walking up to a bank and I see the doors and I see the safe, like those things are there and they're locked, right? Like I know that there's impediments in the way, right? But if I don't know that the front door's open or if the safe's open, you can walk right in. That's probably a big risk we should address. And I think that's what we're starting to see now with a lot of the cloud leaks and exposures that have been out there. That we really have to go back and start taking those snapshots and taking that part seriously, just because we have these large sprawling networks across multiple hybrid environments, and need a way to really control that with a tool set. So that one I find very interesting.
Yeah. So Ryan, and interestingly, this is obviously very close to my heart because at Fire Compass we work on external attack surface management. Of course, when we started, the baby had no name. 2 3 years back, there was no name for this. So I'll share a little bit about kind of our perspective on this and why we kind of got started. That'll also probably throw some light into the problem statement, why we believe this is something very interesting. And I'm of course very happy that Gartner also mentioned us in two of the new markets out of the four which we have seen. We'll get deep dive into all the four new markets and also the other ones at the next phase. So one interesting thing which I noticed, a few years back, was that there are several major breaches which looked apparently very weird. Like one of the largest financial services company, they got breached because they had an open MongoDB without any password. And we have very high respect for these guys. We know the security team is awesome. They got great tools and great processes, etc. So we were very curious, why did they miss it? And once we went a little bit deeper, we found out that this particular database was made online by their marketing team. I mean, this is a kind of my favorite story. I talk about this very often. And that was something like a eye opener. And what we kind of realized was that there's a kind of big shift which is happening in the industry. That is 5 or 10 years back, anything that had to go online had to go through the IT team, right? Because you
Hmm.
could not get access to public IP easily. That was like a treasured resource. But today,
Right.
the cloud guys can do things on their own. The marketing guys can do things on their own. The projects guys can spin out new applications and APIs and this, that, and whatnot. And now with the remote working, all of a sudden, the cybersecurity folks are kind of the imagine the situation of a head of a HR of an organization who doesn't know the list of the employees they have, right? How do you manage that? So that's a very new kind of problem which was not there 5 years back, even though the reconnaissance as a technique was there for last 10 years. But nobody really bothered about reconnaissance at a scale before because it wasn't such a big problem. I remember at DEFCON there was Recon Village, etc., quite a few years back. But that problem wasn't really that big. But these are the drivers which kind of shifted the landscape all of a sudden. And today we need to do continuous reconnaissance and continuous attack surface discovery because that's what the bad guys are doing. That's what the ransomware guys are doing. That's what the nation state actors are doing. So doing it at a scale, doing it continuously, knowing our external attack surface, this I believe because of this particular reason that it's a must have. I mean, we can't survive 5 years down the line or even a few years down the line without doing continuous asset discovery and continuous testing. And Gartner,
Yep.
by the way, broke down asset discovery into two markets. One is the external attack surface management, and also something called the CASM or CASM, which is for the internal asset discovery, which is a different segment altogether. So we'll also talk about that. So, Ryan, you want to add something on the internal asset discovery and CASM, which Gartner mentioned? I mean, that's something where
Yeah.
we don't work on, and I have a little bit of insights, but might be you have a better story to tell over there.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's become extremely important, right? And it's because of that sprawling asset, discovery that we just can't do. Like, there's too many things out there. Everyone's at home. Your networks aren't consolidated, so and being able to do it in the sense that you don't have to use like a scanning tool or something else to be able to find it. To be able to leverage other tools, use APIs to be able to pull in like I see this many assets, I see this many assets. How do we get a consolidated view of all the stuff I actually have? It's funny coming from a military background because like we're in the Air Force or anything else. If you were issued a weapon, like you held on to that, like no one touched it. That was yours. It went from you back to the armory and back out. It's interesting with computers and everything else we have nowadays. We don't, not that we don't take it that seriously, but we don't, and there's no way to to attest to what's here and what's there, and even in applications that's even harder because those aren't physical things you can carry around. They exist in other places. So I think that's become a necessity based on the sprawl of our environments, and putting those two things together where you can actually track that on an hourly or daily basis, right, to see what's gone up and down, especially really large companies that are issuing lots of different, new hardware or push out new applications all the time. Keeping track of those is very difficult. So I think we're going to see, I think, a really sharp rise and fast move in that one. And it can see it being integrated into other tool sets as well. You're already seeing that from like EDR products and others that are adding those features in because it's really important to understand what your devices are talking to. And that's part of like the whole cyber kill chain, right? Like once an attacker gets in through, I mean, especially with the external attack surface expanding, they're getting in much easier, right? They're running lots of bots. They're finding hooks in somewhere where they can just get a step in, and then they can start moving, right? They've like let the automation take place, and they can start moving in different directions. And if we don't know what's there for them to move to or what protections are in place, we just don't have a good view on the risks that exist in our network or the hotspots in our network that we should be more concerned about. Maybe build some more detections there, maybe focus more attention on like what that risk could be to our overarching security posture, right? So it's really going to be an important part, not just this year, but moving forward the next 4 or 5 years for customers to really start getting a grasp on that, so they can build better protections.
Yeah, and Ryan, this is very interesting. I remember a few years back, one of the RSS Sandbox winner was this asset management company or asset discovery company, but internal asset discovery. I mean, not the
Mm-hmm.
external. So Gartner kind of divided these two markets. One is the external attack surface management, which continuously scans the entire internet. I mean, it
Yep.
scans the deep web and the surface web and everything, and tries to build out the attack surface from outside in perspective. CASM or cyber asset attack surface management, which Gartner calls. I mean, the name. I mean, it sounds like there's some overlap between these two, but this set of products sits inside the organization. There would be hardware or something sitting inside which kind of collects data from your various devices, logs and various kind of stuff, and then it builds the internal asset map. So these are the two kinds of tools, and the vendors who are out there, the ones who does external attack surface management like what we do at Fire Compass, I mean, they don't do the CASM, and the ones who does CASM doesn't do the external attack surface management. So these are like two very different kind of solutions which has come up. And the third new thing, Ryan, we could dive deeper into is the autonomous red teaming and autonomous penetration testing, which Gartner came up with this name. We were at Fire Compass calling it continuous automated red teaming or CART. So philosophically, it's the same thing. So Gartner terminology is autonomous red teaming. So what's your thoughts on autonomous red teaming, Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really gonna, I think, continue to expand and grow, just because it's so important. So like when you look at the overall hype cycle, right? You look at vulnerability assessment, right? Being all the way at the point of like we've found a way to do an assessment on vulnerability and know how to work with it as an organization. Like that's awesome. Like you tie that back into the innovation side where now I take, we have thousands of vulnerabilities in networks. How do I take the ability to be able to assess and know what to do with the vulnerability and now do it at a continuous scale that we're able to, see it, patch it, or build a workarounds, and then test and ensure that what we've put in place is actually protecting us from that. And I think what's really driving this is that we're really good at identifying vulnerabilities. We're not as good at putting patches in or putting workarounds in because as we both know that maybe 60% of all vulnerabilities have a patch, and most of the stuff you have to segment or work something else around or hide it from being exposed. But by able to do this autonomous testing, we can put things in place and continuously look at, I built a protection, is that protection working, right? Because we as defenders want to be able to know that the thing we put in place is actually, we don't want to wait till it actually gets hit and then, oh, it didn't, the thing we thought we was going to work didn't work. So we're going to see more and more companies adopting kind of this strategy going forward of building things, testing it, and making that kind of that OODA loop lifecycle, right? That observe, orient, decide, and act, right? And each one of those components, you're probably going to have to evolve something else to deal with the new threat or what else came out that day. So being able to do this at speed or at scale is going to be the challenge, but something we need to address as our again our attack surface continues to expand. But something I think we're going to see grow really fast and become much more adopted across the industry.
Yeah. So interestingly, Ryan, as you were talking, I was kind of remembering a couple of decades back when application security testing was largely manual.
Mm-hmm.
So it was largely manual, right? I mean, I remember those days when WASC was there and WASP was there. WASC has today vanished. I mean, most of the classes of WASC, I mean, people had to do manually. I mean, just a few classes could be automated. And today, I mean, most of application security testing, apart from some of those business logic testing and deeper testing, I mean, is automated, right? So as an industry over a decade, it got uh, largely automated. And I see a similar kind of trend happening for red teaming as well. And the reason why I see that trend kind of happening is because I mean, it's not because that technologically we did not, as an industry, have the capability to do that. We had the capability to do it earlier as well, but there was less of need for it. But today, the
Yeah.
drivers are really prominent because, I mean, just like we are doing this digital transformation, all the bad guys, the fraud guys, they have also done the digital transformation. They're also not able to go out on street and do their stuff, right? So they're also going online. So today, all the bad guys have great automation and they are doing these continuous attacks. So if the bad guys are doing continuous attacks, we also need to do the same thing, right? So that's
Right.
one very important thing. And the second challenge is that the usual vulnerability assessment tools just throws a lot of issues. And theoretically, yes, I mean, all those are important. But which one should I prioritize, right? Like the one with the problem of patching that you mentioned. How do I prioritize? So if I have to prioritize it right, I need to probably know which are the attacks which are most, most likely, and which are the ones which somebody could actually exploit and get into, right? So, kind of better prioritization is very, very necessary. And such kind of autonomous red teaming, which does the adversary emulation or does exactly like what an adversary would do, is something which can help you to not just find those issues a lot faster. That's definitely one. I mean, you get to know a lot faster. And secondly, it also helps you to prioritize. And thirdly, the usual ASM tools, attack surface management tools, throws a lot of findings. There's a lot of false positives. So when you go and do the attacks, you actually remove those noise. So it kind of solves quite a few problems and does the best kind of adversary emulation from outside in. So that's the reason why I believe that this is something which, as an industry, we must have to scale and do it. We must discover all our assets continuously. We must test all our assets continuously because of a simple reason that today the adversary is doing exactly the same thing. All the nation state actors have got this capability. All the ransomware groups have got this capability. So we have no way out. We must do that. So I was quite happy to see this a couple of markets coming up, including Chasm. I mean, we don't operate in the Chasm or CASM field, but I absolutely believe that's a big pain point because none of the large organizations would know how many assets they have, where the data is,
Right.
and stuff like that, right? So it's a very, very big challenge. And if you don't know all the assets that you have, you can't protect it, right? I mean, if you think of NIST framework, the first step is identify, right? We have to identify the assets. If you don't start with that, then the rest of it kind of becomes half-hearted, right? So
Right.
these are the three new things, Ryan. And there was another fourth thing. I guess it is automated. What is it? The pen test as a
So
service, right?
pen test, yeah, pen test
Pen
as a
test as a
service, and
service. You want to add
yeah.
something on that?
No, I mean I think it's an interesting thing I've started to see come up over the last couple of years where we're using a mix of tools and humans because I think in mix of all these innovation triggers, there's still the human element that's built into that, right? Like not everything that can be automation has to be built by a human, right? We have to figure out what to do and build the steps into building the automation, but we also have to understand the business risk for drivers, right? So when we're looking at what things are risky for us, it's only a risk if it's a risk to the business and what the impact of that is needs to be discerned by a human. I don't think computers can really they can help with some of the algorithms that we build into them and run models for us, but we're still the ones that own the risk and have to classify it. So I think the pen test as a service has helped us to give us something that has more scale to it, right? To be able to run more continuous tests, right? But get both the blend of what we can gain from the computers and what we can gain from a human kind of mixed together in the same box. And I think it's becoming more widely adopted, and I think it will continue to become more widely adopted because it's going to give more scale. It's not a we're moving past the point in time. Like I did a test on this one vulnerability that someone could use and move. We're going to move to the next one next year, right? That gives you very little value right now in today's environments to say that either you have a risk or you don't. You should be doing this consistently. So having a service built around that is going to help customers actually address that moving forward so they can do more of these over an entire year as opposed to just one at a time and thinking that's going to help them, with any sort of kind of integrated risk management moving forward.
Yeah. So interestingly, I mean, most of what we see is more like a product or technology. So pen test as a service has that component of, as you highlighted, has the component of both product and service. And interestingly, Gartner also put these bug bounty platforms as a part of it. So the bug bounty platforms are part of pen test as a service, and also there are some new set of vendors who are also doing the product plus services approach together. So that's the new market which has come up. So these are the four new things which we have seen this year: autonomous pen test and red teaming, and the external attack surface management, and CASM and pen test as a service. So these are broadly the kind of four new stuff which we saw this year. So Ryan, let's look into some of the other technologies which are out there. Do you want to highlight anything else? Because we can see, like for example, XDR, DRPS, these are moving up, right? It's going to the peak of inflated expectations, and we have multiple other technologies, including BAS and IRM and SOAR, etc. Anything that I know there are too many of them. Any specific thing you want to talk about?
Well, I thought the one that I found really interesting was managed detection and response services, right? That moving down into the trough, and I find it interesting because having worked in those companies before, and then also just being an analyst in the space, like this is a part where nomenclature and like describing what your product or service actually does is so important in helping consumer confidence, right? So managed detection and response says that they detect threats and they respond to threats, right? Or that's what I get as a consumer. I say I expect that to be happening. And the problem is that there's varying arrays of detection and response that are out there for the different providers, right? So some of them, the response is just going to be, I sent you an alert, I found something, right? You do something with it. Some of them can be like, I'm going to go ahead and isolate this for you because I found something bad, right? But those two responses are very different, and a customer expectation between those two could be varying as well. So, for almost all these products or services having well-defined outcomes is an important piece to it. So I think we've seen just from that example that customers don't always build good, but this is what I expect from you. Can you do this, right? And I think a lot of technology companies and services also will hype what they can do, right? And are overzealous about it, which is part of selling. But then the two don't mix. So I think you're going to start seeing that continue to drop more and more until like, and I'm starting to see this more now, but the response services become more mature and customers can start adapting them more into their environments. Interestingly enough, 3, 4 years ago, if I asked a customer if I can respond to a threat for them, usually it was just on the firewall and block an IP space or something like that to keep an attack out. But if you did that, you probably break a lot of stuff in the process. And customers like, don't touch my network, tell me what's wrong, and I'll go fix it. But now with the sprawl and computers, being isolated by themselves, have access to things, I think customers are becoming much more open to allowing, a service or a company or a tool to respond to something, right? Go ahead and isolate, keep that thing from running on my computer because I don't want to get hit with ransomware, right? Go ahead and do that. Tell me it happened, but keep it from occurring. That's kind of the next phase going forward. So some, things like that I think are interesting. But ones I find interesting too is like again, going back to SIM, like, and SIM's been around for a long time, but it continues to evolve with new architectures and with the cloud. So seeing that customers are now able to find, I think we're now at the point now where we understand what a SIM use case is, right? We've been talked about it for so many years now. We finally understand this is what I could use a tool to do something for, and people are starting to do it. So like that I find and hardening going forward that we're able to start addressing those with a tool set and then wrapping teams around them. I think one other one I'd call out is probably I'll say both, like all three of them that are in the bottom, the trough of disillusionment, like the TI services and network detection and response. I think great examples of, like, I've been in the threat intelligence space for a long time. It's really hard to get value from threat intelligence. It's traditionally very noisy. It's a lot of extra things to look at for an analyst who just really needs to, like, when I get an alert, I love some enrichment to this alert to tell me, like, what is the things that this the actor is known to do? What does this alert mean for me in general? And it's really hard to get that data, from a service or from just the TI platform itself. So um, I don't know where those go. Even with network detection and response, it's a very point solution, right? It's solving for a specific problem, or it's adding in extra value to into your SIM or something else, where it maybe is an additional level of information you can look at as part of an analysis. But as a standalone product, how much value does it actually add? I think you see there, like, customers aren't seeing the full value that it could be there. So some of those I think you'll start seeing moving off, either integrating into other products. I mean, almost any security product nowadays has some sort of threat intelligence feed or integration that they consume. So a service may not make as much sense for that. But even like the network side, you could probably integrate that platform into another tool and get what you're looking for out of it, as opposed to buying a separate tool to do it. So yeah, some interesting things that I think we see in there as they're evolving over the last couple of years.
Yeah. So Ran, you made some very interesting points, and I fully agree with you. Like, for example, TI is in the bottom of the disillusionment, right? So, and as you have rightly mentioned, one of the big challenge, and you are there as an operator, you are more on the ground and working on these things. But what I have observed as well is that people find it very hard because there's just too much of stuff, right? Which is the thing which relates to me precisely. So many of these things might eventually become part of something bigger, right? That's one. Another thing which I just wanted to highlight along with what you mentioned is deception. So I believe that deception is also probably going to go further down the disillusionment and then get integrated with certain other things. And personally, by the way, I just loved deception because it's very, very creative. I was part of the advisory board for one of the deception companies. They got acquired recently um, uh, uh, by a kind of a ZTA company, or secure. So you may call it ZTA company. Yeah. So we are seeing some of these acquisitions happening. And interestingly, I'm a big kind of lover of deception as an idea. But then the challenge which I guess people are facing is that it's not a standalone thing which kind of solves the complete problem for a customer. So if you look at any of the major problems of a customer, definitely detecting the attacks and stuff like that is very important, right? Detection is very important, but deception doesn't really do it completely. So the eventual winner is going to be somebody who kind of builds into a mini platform and adds all this capability together. And we saw that exactly happening in case of Casby. Now, very interestingly, Casby is in the scope of enlightenment, but I have a belief that Casby as a standalone thing is not going to be there in the industry. It's a great thing. I again love Casby as a technology, very cool set of technologies. I have some friends who are founders of some of those companies, etc. But the challenge is that it again doesn't solve the entire problem. And as a result, what is happening is Casby is becoming part of either the ZTA solution, zero trust gateways or something like that. So it's
Yep.
becoming part of that, or the secure web gateway and stuff like that. So again, Casby is becoming part of something. Now, interestingly, there are some companies in this. Instead of they becoming part of somebody bigger, they themselves became bigger. So one of the companies in Casby, they broadened themselves, and today they are a ZTA company. So we may see some of these companies themselves emerging as a mini platform, but Casby as just a standalone technology, I believe is going to it's not going to be there in the long run. Just like deception as a standalone technology is not going to be there in the long run. So in the future, we will see some of these things changing. I mean, I don't believe any of these things are going to vanish. They're going to morph and become part of something else and stuff like that. So uh, I find this kind of gazing into the future very very exciting. So Ryan, any other kind of concluding thoughts which you have on in terms of how do you think the future is going to be like? So let's end it with what do you think the future is going to be like?
Yeah, I think the future trend is again consolidating capabilities for an analyst. Again, so XDR is an example I would pull together as something that's starting to rise in the innovation trough. You know, you have I think things like CASB deception, SOAR, all those things will be integrated into a platform of the future, right? But getting there is going to take 5 years to do. You have companies like Palo Alto and Microsoft and Cisco are all making those investments now. We're going to see more of that driving forward. It's not ready, in my opinion, not ready for showtime. I think you're still going to get a lot more use from using point products to get real value from the data and the words that are coming in. But ultimately, the thing we should care about is the sanity of our analysts, right? Like we need to give them tools that work and give them less dashboards, right? Less things. If you've ever sat down with a security analyst before, they probably have 12, 13, 14 tabs open in their browser looking at different things at any given time, right? So the idea is the more these things we can pull into singular platforms and combine capabilities and build better interoperability. I think one of the things that Hype Cycle mentioned was the release of more APIs, more integrations. We have to work together to move forward. So I think in the future we're going to see a lot more of that. We'll see a lot more consolidation, but I wouldn't look at this and say you're going to see a whole lot of change from these. I think you'll see some shifts, a few things disappear and integrate to other things. But in 5 years, we're still going to be dealing with a lot of the same issues. It's not going to get any easier. It's just going to continue to be complex. And the thing that keeps it from moving faster is just training. It's the knowledge base of us as the people delivering service. There's just so much to learn and so much to keep up with. How do you take even an experienced person and keep building more of those? That training pipeline has to really accelerate if we want to really address more of these issues in the future.
Great. So, Ryan, I mean, you mentioned about this consolidation and things integrating with each other, talking to each other better, and kind of solving that big problem, right? So, that's something which is really, I'm a big believer of that. And I believe that's the future because without that, imagine the medium sized businesses, they can't exist, right? Large organizations can still kind of hire talent and do those engineering and stuff like that and build it. But medium sized guys, they just can't, right? So there is such a strong need that there will be people who will come out and solve this problem. It's not going to be easy for sure because we have an adversary in cybersecurity, unlike in e-commerce. I mean, and other places. I mean, you have your usual competition as the adversary. It's not a game where you have to defeat somebody. Here, it's a very different kind of game. So that's why the landscape is continuously changing. It is super complex, super hard. these products don't talk to each other, so there has to be a solution around consolidation. That's one. But another thing which I wanted to highlight is another movement which I'm kind of noticing and observing, and I'm a big believer of that movement as a broad-based movement in the cybersecurity. Just like we saw the XDR movement a few years back, and it's still continuing, right? And that's a very important thing, combining detection and response, right? So the second kind of movement which I want to highlight, Ryan, is continuous. Things getting continuous as a part of a movement. And if you look at zero trust, I mean, I consider zero trust as a kind of misnomer, because zero trust is not really about zero trust. What it essentially says is continuous trust evaluation, right? It doesn't say, I mean, zero trust. It says like, okay, I might trust you right now, but in the next moment, I'm going to evaluate the trust once again, right? And it builds an architecture and framework to have that underlying philosophy. So zero trust is continuous trust evaluation. If you look at external attack surface management, it is continuous external attack surface discovery. Look at autonomous red teaming, it is continuous red teaming, right? Look at penetration testing, which Gartner brought up as a service. It's again continuous. So there's a lot of continuous kind of drive, even though the word continuous is not there. That's a underlying movement which is happening in the cybersecurity industry for a very simple reason, that the bad guys are doing the same. So these are broadly kind of two big movements which I'm noticing right now. One is the consolidation movement, and the other is the continuous movement. Is there any other big scale movement, Ryan, which you are observing? So Ryan, I don't know if you are able to hear me. I was asking any other broad movement which you are noticing in the industry.
So I would say, and I love what you're going back to the continuous piece of it. So I think a broad movement we're going to see moving forward or I hope I start seeing more and more of, and it's really hard to do, so it's going to be hard to adopt. But I think microsegmentation is got to be on the roadmap for everyone moving forward. Because if you think about it, like if I want to continuously test or I want to build better detections, like you really got to lock down who has access to the doors, right? Like, and that's the thing we don't have today is we don't have lots of doors that limit access in there. We just once you get in, you can get into stuff. But with microsegmentation and saying like only these IPs, only these users, only these identities can access this segment, but it makes it a lot easier for me to build a detection and response. So all of a sudden something got in that's not on the list, right? It's like having a bouncer at every door. I want to have that moving forward, but it's really hard to get there and do that. Not many companies have moved in that direction. So I think if we start adopting more of that, it's going to make it easier to adopt a lot of these things, to do more continuous testing, and even if it's in a phased approach, I think that really is our step forward to uplift what we can do from defending networks as opposed to just trying to look at everything all at once because you just really can't. So
Wonderful. Great. So, Ryan, this was a great conversation. We discussed about these new things which we observed in Gartner Hype Cycle, and also what we believe the future is like. So, I would like to thank you for joining us today. Thanks a lot, Ryan.
I really appreciate the time today and look forward to maybe doing this again another week.